Hare Krishna. Today I'm speaking with Ranchor Prabhu, a senior godbrother of mine who I have very fond memories of from my days in England and Ireland before I came to stay in India. This is the 1970s. We were together for some time in Ireland, and I particularly remember, there are so many memories, but I particularly remember what I always think of as his heavenly chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra in front of Sri Sri Radha. It's just something which is etched in my mind. It's just everyone there, whenever he would sit down and sing before the deity, they'd just be transported to Radha Landanishwara. They'd be transported from London to Krishna.
Luckily, I was totally unaware of that. But I've always liked to sing. That's true.
Yeah.
But I remember, a very, very extremely serious young man who came to the temple. And basically, I have this one recollection, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, that all you really wanted to do, apart from chant your rounds, was read Prabhupada's books for the first month or so. I seem to remember you were just sitting, have I got my memory correct? Sitting outside Prabhupada's room, just reading all day long. Yeah. You wanted to read the whole Bhagavatam, I seem to remember. I was astonished.
Have a memory to that I was told when I first joined, I accepted everything I was told except one thing. I was told that reading is Maya. Yeah. You have to just do service. If you're reading, it's an excuse to avoid service. There were some funny things floating around.
Yeah.
There's so many good memories of those days. Especially Radha Landanishwara temple was something just really very, very, very special. Anyway, I remember a few years ago I visited you. I was visiting London, and then I went to visit you in your house in a little enclave in central London. It's just a very quiet spot, right in central London. Amazingly quiet place, and right in central London.
Yeah, and my former wife, Leela Shakti, she's still living there. That's still it's still the family home, but it's hers now.
I have a very good. I think all of us who are brahmachari, you were unusual there in being a grihasta in Berry Place, but most of us were brahmacharis, and we didn't talk about the ladies there much. But the impression I have is that we all held them in the very highest respect, especially because they were so dedicatedly serving the deities day and night. And Leela Shakti Mataji, she was the head of them all and kept them all in good shape and good line, and everyone was in love with the deities, and the Matajis were serving them so nicely. Anyway, when I visited you there in your little home in your enclave there, I remember I noticed on the altar, you had a nice altar, and Jesus was there also, and you mentioned something about how you were attached to Jesus. And then I read it somewhere in the Veda base, I believe it's in one of those ISKCON Communications journals, where there's some transcript or something of a discussion with Christians, interfaith, something like that. And you state how you never thought that you had stopped being a Christian, but you were a Christian devotee of Krishna. Oh, one thing I should say here is that here in India, among the Hindus who we mostly interact with, although there's also a large non-Hindu population, there is a lot of concern about what is perceived as the often underhand or improper tactics by which Christianity is being spread quite rapidly.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with all of that. I've seen it a lot in Orissa, particularly.
So, but on the other hand, well, let's see Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, he was very appreciative when he saw what we can say real Christianity, which is to love God with all thy heart. And he had a genuine appreciation of that. For instance, in Australia, he had a very good rapport with the Christian leaders there. He was very much appreciated when he visited a Franciscan seminary. You can see Srila Prabhupada, he's asked by one seminarian that, well, what do you think of Francis of Assisi? And Srila Prabhupada, as usual, would say, well, what is his teaching? And then the reply came, well, he saw, I can't remember exactly, you may know better than me. He saw all the animals and the birds as parts of God, brothers, and this and that. And Prabhupada, his spontaneous response was that, oh, that is first-class God consciousness, which is, of course, according to the Bhagavatam version. Sarva Bhutani Yapashyad Bhagavad Bhava Matmanahab Bhutani Pashanti Atmani Chapma. I'm getting mixed up. Anyway, that Esha Bhagavatotama. The topmost devotee sees every living being as part and parcel of Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada had some strong words against cheating religion in various forms, but he also had appreciation for Christianity. And yeah, I'm interested. What is it? What is it about Christianity? I mean, there's so many things that can be said. In Britain in particular, Britain and America, in the last couple of decades, there's been real heavy assault on Christianity from Dawkins and others. And I suspect that you won't find in Britain many people who would openly and boldly call themselves a Christian. Anyway, tell us all about it. What is your attachment to Jesus, actually? That's what we're talking about. You're not a Christian in the sense that for you it's not a matter, a social matter or a political matter. Some people, they may be Christian to, just like a leading politician in Britain was a Hindu and she converted to Christianity, I suspect for career reasons. What do you feel? What is the feeling? That's really what we're talking about here, I suspect, because you're a very feeling kind of person.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I suppose that immediately comes to mind is that I was brought up to love Jesus. You know, my mother actually was not particularly a religious person. She belonged to the Church of England, but my father, and she wasn't religious, but she respected my father's faith. He was a Roman Catholic, and he took care to have me educated very well by Christians. So I was my first school, at the age of 8, I was sent away to boarding school, and I boarded at Westminster Cathedral, which is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church in England. And there my education was looked after by, there were Catholic priests, but there were also nuns. And the nuns looked after all our, childhood needs, and they were wonderful. There was one that was grumpy, and we all used to make fun of her, but the rest of them, they were very caring. And although the priests, like any members of a religious order, they were not without faults at all, but they were obviously genuine. And so we were woken up every morning at, I think it was 6:30, and every morning we went to mass in the crypt underneath the cathedral. And because I was a member of the choir, I learned to sing in praise of God. And I loved that.
Oh, wonderful. And that really morphs well into Krishna consciousness.
Sorry, exactly. It's Krishna consciousness. And so I remember particularly a monk came from the Isle of Wight, where there was an abbey called Quar Abbey. And he taught us in detail the art of singing plain chant. Plain chant is the ancient in Europe, it's the ancient origins of religious music, really. So what he taught us is always be aware that when you are singing these Latin, it was all in Latin, these are prayers. And so it's not music, it's sung prayer. And I want you to be conscious of and thinking of the meaning of what you're singing. So, so that was it, you know. After being there for, I think I was there for 4 years, and we were boarders. So that meant we even spent Christmas and Easter there because we were needed to sing, and we used to dress, you know, in the robes and what have you. It was a very intense, but extremely satisfying experience. Then my father paid for me to go to a Benedictine abbey in Sussex called Worth Abbey, and again another 4 years. And of course, you know, as you pass into puberty, then all kinds of things start to happen, and life gets a little bit more complicated. But it was a boys-only boarding school, and I became aware of the, you know, the foibles and the brokenness of some of the monks and the priests. They were all Benedictine monks. But I saw also past that to the essence of what they were doing, which is the essence of Benedictine life, which spread all over Europe, is work and prayer, and in equal sort of proportion, work and reading also, and prayer. But the idea is that the work is itself a kind of prayer. So very similar to the concept of bhakti yoga, you know, where what I do is done as an offering for God. So are you hearing me okay? Because your image is frozen.
Yeah. I'm listening
okay.
very intently, yeah. Very happily.
Good. So by the time, just before my 17th birthday, I left school. I finished my school, my education.
You were a year ahead in that case, because you did your A-levels, did you?
That's right. Academically, I did okay. So it was all completed.
People take their A-levels at 18, but you were a year ahead.
Yeah. And so I studied architecture, but I ended up as an art student in Chelsea. So during those 2 or 3 years, until I met the devotees when I was 20, I experimented a bit with material life, you could say. You know, there was that period of 2 or 3 it was from my 17th birthday till my 20th birthday. That's the 20th birthday is just before I met the devotees. During that period, I tasted what the world had to offer, and by the time I met the devotees,
we're having internet problems here. By the time you met the devotees, just after your 20th birthday, you were frazzled.
Yeah. Well, okay, you could use that word. That's not a word I would have used, but I had reached a point where I couldn't really see anything I wanted in this world. And thinking on my own and my own experiences, I came to the conclusion, I think the only thing that I'm going to be interested in that's going to keep me going will be something to do with religion. And my only religion that I knew about at that point was Jesus. So I remember talking it through with my father and saying, I think I might want to be a priest. And he said, that does not surprise me. I always thought you might want to do that. But then I discovered Krishna and I met the devotees. You know, I mean, I was very lucky because when Srila Prabhupada arrived, the previous summer, actually, when he arrived in 1969 in England, 3 or 4 days after he arrived, he was interviewed on late night television, and I saw that. And I was absolutely mesmerized, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. His Indian accent was a little incomprehensible to me, but I thought he said, all you have to do is chant God's name. And when I heard him say that, I thought, it can't be that simple. But then he was asked, would you like to demonstrate? And with great joy, he said, yes. And he went over and sat down on the studio floor with a few devotees, and they sang Hare Krishna. And as soon as I heard that chanting, I thought, that's it. That's what I want. Yeah. But somehow or another, that was the year I started my preparatory year at Chelsea Art College, and that was a wonderful and exciting experience. So some things kind of got swept out of my mind a little bit, but I saw once or twice the devotees singing on King's Road, well, I mean, in actual fact, I have to be honest with you, and there's no point in not, that the decisive experience for me was on my 20th birthday. I was living just next to Chelsea in Fulham.
Chelsea?
My friends, I was living in Fulham, but the college was Chelsea, so it's next door to Chelsea.
Okay.
Yeah,
they're right in the same borough, everything.
Yeah, that's right. So my friends said to me, Richard, we've bought the best acid, that's LSD, that money can buy to celebrate your 20th birthday. So we're going to go down to Sussex, and we're going to go into the forest. And we discussed where we would go, and we went into a cave. And I had an extraordinary, totally God-conscious experience. I mean, I was just swept out of this world. I went and walked in the forest at the middle of the night. It was pitch dark, but I could see everything, because that's, everything became luminous and alive. And I felt the presence of this wonderful, loving, totally embracing, shining being who came and embraced me. And I knew that I have now met God. I mean, that was totally what I believed. And I didn't know who this was. It wasn't Jesus particularly. It was just this divine, all-embracing presence. And so, 2 weeks later, I had a friend who'd started visiting the Krishna temple, and we were together going up to London. I was going to start my new year at the college, and we got a flat together in Chelsea. And we agreed, even before we went up, we were going to go and visit the Krishna temple 3 times every week, because it was open 3 evenings a week to visitors, plus the Sunday feast.
At that time, I think not. That was before Berry Place?
No, that was Berry Place, yeah.
Berry Place, yeah.
So, the first time I went there, the very first devotee I spoke to was Yamuna. And I helped her lay out the feast downstairs in time for the guests to come down. And while we were doing that, Shamsundar came in, and I was introduced to Shamsundar. So those are my two, most beloved spiritual companions, actually. And even though, of course, Yamuna has moved somewhere else, but still I feel her presence. Shamsundar I'm still in fairly regular touch with. So for me, to the point, a year later, Shamsundar arranged for me to be married. Prabhupada was there the following year in the summer. Prabhupada was there, and he agreed that I should be married, and he gave me my second initiation. And he agreed at Shamsundar's suggestion, I believe, that I should go and open a temple in Manchester. So I went up to Manchester with my new young wife, and we started a temple there. And the third member of our little group, was Mahavishnu, who's now Swami. Oh. So the three of us, you know, we were pounding the streets, and so many people were coming. It was unbelievable. You know, within the space of 6 months, I counted 14 devotees joined, and I think every single one of them is still a devotee. Every single one, nobody left. Pardon me?
Can you say some names?
Yes, Sakshi Gopal,
Oh,
Tribongananda.
Oh, really? They're really great devotees.
Mohan, who passed away sadly.
They're all still active, huh?
Yeah. Astasaki, Ramadevi, who recently left. Vimukta Sangha is still around. You may not know him. There's the immediate ones that come to mind. Yeah. So while I was
Tribangananda, Sakshi Gopal, they've all been very active all their lives in Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. So while I was there, I wrote to Srila Prabhupada, and I asked him that, I told him, you know, here we are in Manchester and so on, and I asked him, you know, I meet Christians on the street, and some of them are sort of against us, and I don't understand why, because what we're doing is what Jesus taught, so far as my understanding is. But I said, but I know Jesus taught love of God, even though the Christians don't always seem to like us. Some do. You know, I used to be invited all the time to Christian places and churches and so on. But I said to Prabhupada, one question I have, please tell me, if Jesus was a pure lover of God, which I know you have said, I've read it in your books, why did he eat? So Prabhupada gave a wonderful answer. He said, Jesus is the Son of God, and if he wants to, he can eat the whole world. And they were living in the desert. What else to do? There was nothing else to eat. So he just dismissed my doubt. Don't worry about it. He's a lover of God. He's the Son of God. And so I was very happy to hear that. And consequently, you say that, you know, you read that I didn't, what I would have said is, I never felt that I had to deny or give up my faith in Jesus, because I never saw it as in conflict with being a devotee of Krishna. That's not to say that I spend my time worshipping Jesus, but I honor Jesus, absolutely, and Mother Mary. I do keep, it's true, to this day, I keep their pictures on my altar, because that's where I first learned about God. Yeah. Yeah, go on, you're going to say something now.
No, you please go on.
All right.
You please go on.
Okay. So over the years, many of the devotees in the temple had no real knowledge or they didn't have much favorable experience of Christianity, but I did. So I took it upon myself right from the start to cultivate favorable relationships with real Christians who, you know, Krishna would bring them to the temple, or he'd introduce me to them out in the street or whatever. Sometimes invitations would arrive. I made friends, you know, with, well, I mean, so many Christian ministers and teachers over the years. And yeah, so I sort of kept that up. And as I say, I never really saw it as a conflict. And even of course, many of them are not vegetarian, which is distressing. It's upsetting. I don't really understand why. But I can also see that they are good people, many of them, and they really believe in a personal God. This is the thing about, you see, I've come to appreciate, perhaps more than I did, that what is special for me about authentic Christians, and I'm not talking about the characters that, push their ideas onto the people of India. I think that's absolutely abhorrent what they do. But what I'm speaking of is authentic Christians. By and large, they do believe that God is a person, although they don't really have much of a philosophical grounding to navigate their way through that. But that is how they identify with God. That's in my experience. Mm-hmm. And that's how I was brought up. I was brought up when I was at Worth. So I would have been 13, 14 when I first got there. They entered me into the house singing competition or the house music competition. My voice had not yet broken. So I was taken on by the oldest monk in the community. What was his name? His name just escapes me. But he was a lovely, lovely old man, and he was very musical. So he played the piano, and he taught me how to sing a beautiful song in praise of God. Where'er you walk, the Supreme Lord walks with you. Those are how the words opened. And it was, he was very devotional, and I think he was a deeply spiritual man. And I got a lot of inspiration from him. So there have been times, I have to acknowledge, there have been times when I have turned to some of the Christian authors, mostly from olden days. People like, I collected a few books here to remind me, because my memory these days, but people like Thomas à Kempis.
Yeah. I remember reading Thomas à Kempis before I came to Krishna. Very deep and inspiring and devotional and
yeah.
Imitation of Christ.
That's right, Imitation of Christ. And he wrote a book called The Inner Life, which I have here, which is a beautiful book.
It's by Thomas à Kempis also?
Thomas à Kempis, yes.
Also by him. I didn't know about that book. The only one I knew was The Imitation of Christ.
Yeah. And Saint Teresa of Avila. I have a book here of hers called The Interior Castle, which is so profound. It's about, the inner journey to ultimately meet your supreme lover, in the interior of the inner castle. And there's, of course, St. Francis of Assisi. I've read a few biographies of his. There's that wonderful book about the way of the pilgrim from Russian mysticism.
Oh, right. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
About chanting the Jesus mantra or something. What is it?
That's right. Yes,
Lord have mercy. Is that Kyrie eleison? Is that?
No. I suppose it's related, but the Jesus prayer. I can't say it in Greek or in Russian, but in English, the Jesus prayer is Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And sometimes people add.
Go on, please.
Sometimes people add at the end of that, have mercy on me, a sinner. Yeah. But I learned it without that last, a sinner. And I was taught that when I was still at school. One of the monks said, you might want to try. He said, we call it an arrow prayer. Arrow, as in it, because it goes straight to the target. And he said, some people all day long. And that thought appealed to me very much. And I still, I'll be honest, in the back of my mind, when I'm chanting on my beads, that same feeling is there, that just repeat this sound. Nothing else is required. It all starts to happen on the interior level, So that was another book. And, well, there have been a good few. But those were some of the... another important book for me is St. John of the Cross, The Dark Night of the Soul. Very profound, because there have been times in my life where, I felt abandoned. There's been times, spiritually, I just felt empty and full of bewilderment. And at those times, well, at one particular time, after I passed my 60th birthday, I was somehow guided to Dark Night of the Soul. And my gosh, I recognized what he was talking about, Yeah. You may know that St. John of the Cross, he, at a pretty young age, he was he belonged to an order of monks who were very strict. I forgot what they were called. But he questioned the authority of Rome. He thought that they were not teaching the true teachings. And so it became known that he had independent thoughts of his own, all based on his devotion to Jesus. So he ended up, as a young man, being thrown into a dungeon. And he was kept underground without daylight, for more than a year, and hardly fed. And he said, if I had spent a second winter, I would have died. But somehow he was helped to escape. And he managed to take shelter in a convent. The nuns hid him. Yeah. And so he survived. And then later he wrote this extraordinary poem in Spanish, The Dark Night of the Soul. And what he did was, the original is a relatively short poem. It's, 10 or 20 verses. But the rest of the book is him then unpacking each of those verses and commenting on them and explaining. So it begins something like, in the middle of the night, in the darkness of the night, I crept out of my window, because in actual fact, he was helped to escape through a window. He said, I escaped into the darkness, and I found in the darkness, I found my lover.
And
it's
allegorical. It works exactly both ways, both factual and spiritual, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So he then goes into, the book is in two halves. The first half, he calls it the dark night of the senses. And it's the hard, challenging journey that one must go on in order to renounce the physical world, in order to bring one's senses under control, to follow within the strict boundaries, which he had done as a monk, and which many, many monks and nuns in those days especially, they lived incredibly strict lives of renunciation. And then he get at the end of that, he says, you come to the place where you're completely broken, because it's so hard, and you feel like you're getting no reward. I mean, I'm obviously I'm abridging. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. Then he says, begins the real dark night, the dark night of the soul. And there's one particular analogy he gives there somewhere in that course of the second part. He says that in a dark dungeon where there is no daylight. There is complete darkness. But if there is a tiny chink through which a shaft of sunlight comes through, he said, unless it strikes something, like a pillar, you won't see it. The light is there, but unless it strikes something, you don't see it. So he gives that analogy that sometimes in the darkest night is when we discover the pure light of God, something like that. So I took a lot of comfort from that, actually, at a certain point in my life, and still there from time to time. I think, this world is such a place of bewilderment and confusion, without, for those of us who have a sort of deeply founded faith in a loving God, and yet in this world, sometimes we can't find that loving presence, remains hidden. We know it's there, but the presence is hidden. And so, but even in those times, I remember, and I remember what Lord Chaitanya told us, which is that, without you.
Can you repeat that, please? We got cut there. You remember what Lord Chaitanya told us?
This whole universe, this whole world is empty without you, Govinda. And even a moment seems like 12 years or more. I can't bear it, the absence. And that is, of course, the deeper we go into the what little we know about Lord Chaitanya. We haven't been told very much. Most of it is, he didn't write anything himself, hardly, and the stories are passed on to us. But what little we know, which is itself profound and deep, we know that he did not find his life easy at all. He didn't seek comfort in this world. And Prabhupada told us right from the beginning, he said, don't expect to see Krishna, but give your love to Krishna, serve Krishna, but don't expect to see Krishna. As Krishna says in the Gita, I keep myself hidden. So sometimes, there have been times, and there still are, when I really feel that sense of emptiness in this world. And I look at my own path, and I feel, I've failed in so many ways. But all I feel that remains is for me to hold on to Krishna's name. So yeah, that's my only hope. It's my only hope.
So, Ranchor Prabhu, in this regard, continuing in the same vein, I remember you telling me at least once a profound experience you had with Srila Prabhupada when he looked you right in the eye, and it wasn't in the flow of conversation, but he recited Asla Shava Padaratang Pinashtuma. He recited the whole verse of Krishna Radharani, saying that Krishna may. Okay.
So yeah, you began to say that I had told you, Prabhupada.
I remember you telling me at least once that a profound moment you had with Srila Prabhupada. You were with Prabhupada.
Okay, well,
there were other people. Yeah, you please tell us all about it.
Yeah, there was a profound moment. It's not something I really particularly want to broadcast to the world.
Well, it's going on now. Share your bliss.
It was very personal.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say is he didn't recite that prayer at that time.
It was something that.
It was not dissimilar. What happened was, in the summer of '73, Prabhupada told Shamsundar, I will stay with you at the manor so long as you can bring me interesting people to meet and to preach to. So Shamsundar let it be known to all of us, if you can find someone special and bring them to see Prabhupada, then he'll stay. So at that time, I was running a little preaching center in Notting Hill Gate. And one day, and I was desperate to find somebody. So one day, I met an extraordinary man on the street. He just stood out. He had a light about him. And we got talking. Of course, I was a shaven up devotee, and he was fascinated by me. And it turned out he was not that important, but he was the leader of the Baha'i community on the Isle of Wight. So I said to him, would you like to meet my guru? I can take you there now. And he said, okay. I was very surprised, but he agreed. He was a man in his 50s. So I phoned up and got the message through, and Prabhupada said, yes, tell him to come at 2:00. So there was just time for us to get the train out and walk across the fields to the manor. And we spent like 2 hours in Prabhupada's room. And there was the two of us, and there was, I think, Pradyumna. And maybe during the course of the conversation, one other devotee came in. Otherwise, and maybe Shruta Kirti might have been in and out of the room. Otherwise, it was the three of us. And as soon as, we started, Prabhupada immediately beckoned to me. He patted the floor right next to him, and he said, come and sit here. And he pulled me closer.
Was that the manor?
So
was it not very place? Manor.
We had just got the manor, so he was in his room there. And then, so as this man, I'll call him John, I can't remember his name, but as John was...
Not recorded, I don't think. Oh, there's no recording of this?
Well, something extraordinary happened. It was recorded, but I didn't know. I'll come to that. So then, every time he spoke, Prabhupada would turn to me and say, what did he say? And then towards the end of the conversation, Prabhupada sometimes would indicate to me, you answer, So it became a very special experience for me. And at the kind of climax, and Prabhupada gradually worked his way through different aspects of the teachings of Krishna consciousness. And particularly, a lot of it was very relevant for me. I think particularly when he began to speak about the presence of Krishna everywhere. He said, in this table, this table is, it is the spiritual energy of God, and Krishna is here. And then he quoted from that beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita, which has always been one of my favorite verses, Yo mam pashyati sarvatra, sarvam cha mai pashyati. Was that Sachamena? That person.
Yeah.
Yes, Sachamena pranashyati. That person who sees me everywhere and who sees everything in me is never lost to me, and nor am I ever lost to that person. So he quoted that verse, and shortly afterwards, at a certain point, he was saying how we must give everything to Krishna, and he looked me deeply in the eyes, and he said, you must give everything to Krishna, just like the gopis. Now, when he said that, I was penetrated by an overwhelming, penetrating embrace, you could say, of love and inspiration and light. And although I was able to continue to function, but inside I just turned to jelly. And for the rest of the afternoon, after the conversation finished, Prabhupada said to him, would you like to see the grounds? And so we went on a tour. He took us on a tour of the grounds. So I was walking. Yeah.
Srila
So I was,
Prabhupada was
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, amazing.
So I was walking along,
Mhm.
sort of slightly behind Prabhupada, and I was just floating. I wasn't touching the ground. I was just floating. And for 3 days afterwards, my whole sense of awareness was completely transformed. So ever after that, I always felt a closeness to Prabhupada. And prior to that, although I was fortunate, I did get some very wonderful occasions sitting with Prabhupada and exchanging conversation, but there was always a tinge of, I suppose, feeling of fear. Yes, because Prabhupada is such a masterful person that in his company I just feel so inadequate. But it's not that sense of inadequacy is still there. I'm a very inadequate person, but it was overwhelmed by a sense of love. Yeah, that came. So that was a great blessing, which I've never forgotten. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I had an email from some devotee friends of the temple, from somewhere in Hertfordshire somewhere, and they said, we receive every month or every 3 months, we receive from the BBT a free gift of a particular recording. I guess this is pre-internet days, or you couldn't just tune into anything like you can now. So they said, we were sent a recording of a conversation. It says, room conversation, Bhaktivedanta Manor, July 1973. And it doesn't say who it is. It just says room conversation, guest, and devotee. But as soon as we heard it, we thought, Ranchor, is this your voice? So I listened to the voice and I thought, surely that's not me. He sounds so confident and informed. That couldn't have been me. They just sent me a snippet. It was just like 2 minutes. So I wrote back, I said, well, I don't know if it's me, but it might be, because I can't think who else it would have been. He had an, educated sort of public school thing. And the very first opening line, yes, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone else. Yeah.
I couldn't think who else it might have been. So I said, can you please send me the whole recording? And so they did. And so I sat down to listen to it. And the opening words, Prabhupada is saying, so tell me about this Baha'i religion. So I knew straight away, this is the one. So I kept it with me for weeks and months, actually. I listened to it constantly and I transcribed it all. And I'm about to start work on, when I wrote the history of Prabhupada in England and all the devotees' experiences, I had to leave myself out. I felt it was necessary to be a channel for everyone else's experiences. And I thought at some point I will write my own experiences. Not that they are profound at all.
Oh, they are.
A very tiny part.
They are. Just what we've got just now is to use the old devotee language, mind-blowing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just a very tiny part of a huge part, picture. Yeah. But
every tiny particle in Prabhupada's lotus feet is just.
You're right.
Oceanic. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. We all had that extraordinary blessing in our lives. So I'm going to write, my story. Yeah.
And it must be like this also, right? It's the external that's there, but what's going on in your heart and your transformations, and that's really the important part, you could say. That's obviously which I guess wasn't so much there in the When the Sun Shines book, because you just had to. It was more like a history, which was a beautiful book, but you can't. It's just like Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu gave a few talks, Srimad Bhagavatam underview, not overview, underview, in which he got into verses just very, very deeply, which you can't do with an overview. So the underview is what's really going on in people's minds and their hearts, and that's really what it's all about, isn't it? But you can't do that in your book is a historical record.
Yes.
History is like
one thing I was careful about in writing, my, you could say, history of the English yatra in Prabhupada's time, I didn't want to make any assumptions. I just wanted to tell the story and let the story speak, for itself. So I didn't wish to offer any interpretations or guesses at what people were thinking and feeling, because each of us, of course, is a vast universe internally, which is not visible generally to one another. We may be able to get a sense, and that sense increases. I guess one becomes more and more aware of one's inner perceptions of one another. The positive ones start to, that sense of being inspired by the presence of a devotee. It's amazing. When I first met Prabhupada was actually on the television screen, but his presence overpowered me. Just like now, I mean, although our connection is through the ether, but I feel very much, your presence.
I've always felt your presence in my life.
Well, I'm conscious, my dear friend, that whenever I was around in London, well, often anyway, sometimes when I went to the temple and you were there, we exchanged some very loving words. I'm conscious of that. And and your example, is there somewhere far ahead of me on the horizon of somebody who has given up. Somebody who has taken Prabhupada's mission very, very seriously.
You know what the real mission, the essence of the, very well, of course, the essence of the mission, Prabhupada said, is if you love Krishna. And that's ultimately what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
We can go on and we can open temples and make disciples and do so many things, but the real thing is, if we love Krishna, and it's going on with you, that's for sure.
Well, most of us can't do what you just said. I certainly can't. So, I'm indebted to someone such as yourself who's able to do that. It's not an easy thing at all. Not at all. So I have tremendous regard for those few of my god brothers and some of my god sisters who've been able to actually light a beacon, to attract many people. I know that was very important to Prabhupada. He really wanted that.
Yeah.
So mostly myself, I have to retire from this world because I find it too difficult these days. So in my garden, I've built a little sacred space where I spend a lot of my time now, chanting and also a bit of writing. I'm editing a previously written book now, and then I shall very soon I shall start this memoir.
But Ranchor Prabhu, I feel it's very important that in your memoir that you also, it's not going to be just facts and figures, but your Krishna consciousness. I think it's very, very important because there's often this perception that the real devotees are the ones who are out there and they're visible and they're doing big things, but really the thing is to become Krishna conscious, and that's open for everyone. You don't have to be a sannyasi, you don't have to be a guru, you don't have to be a GBC, you don't have to be, you can be completely unknown. And actually, if you think the gopis, who were they? They were just absolutely socially, absolutely insignificant. Whole of the Vrajavasis, they were jungle dwellers, not sophisticated people, but Krishna loved them the most. And ultimately, Lord Chaitanya broadcast their glories the most. So I think it's very important that there may be some kind of misconception that unless you're out there and you're really doing big things and you're getting your name out there, and that's real bhakti. Well, it is. I'm not saying it's not bhakti, but that it is there for everyone. And the vast majority of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's followers, and in every sampradaya, we started off talking about Christianity, they're unknown people, but that doesn't matter to Krishna.
That's right.
It doesn't matter to Krishna. Krishna, he loves everyone.
Well, yeah, and I mean, what's important?
Small man's Krishna, you could say something like that.
The small man's Krishna, yeah. No, I love that. It's. I think, you know, my understanding is that whatever, each of us is an individual. Each of us is different in so many ways. You know, it's tempting sometimes to generalize, but we're all different, and each of us has a particular, you know, set of profound capacities, and somehow or other find a way of employing those in Krishna's service. You know, and for some of us, you know, we have. Some of us are gifted to be able to step out into the world a bit, or a lot, you know. Everyone doesn't have that.
Everyone doesn't have that.
Well, the vast majority of people do not have the capacity to go out into the world and communicate meaningfully. And most of the people that have that capacity, of course, they communicate nonsense, and they're ego-centered. They're ego-centered. But the ones who are Krishna-centered and have that capacity, it's a wonderful thing to see them, you know, engaging themselves. I mean, as you do. For most of us, I mean, for me, it's beyond me. I can't do it. I'm fortunate I can write books, and sometimes I can sing. So, but each of us, you know, it may be just to look after the garden, or to look after one's family, you know, one's husband or one's wife. It could be all sorts of small things that might appear unimportant to most people. You know,
Go on, please.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the great books of Christian mysticism that was produced, and nobody knows the name of the author. It's anonymous. All that we know is that he spent his life washing pots in a monastery somewhere in Northern Europe. I think later on, his name, actually, I might even have a book. It's called The Practice of the Presence of God. But he was unknown. Oh, here we are. He's known as Brother Lawrence. But nobody knew who he was, really. And another great Christian mystic, of course, was Julian of Norwich. Now, Julian of Norwich is not a man. Julian is a woman. She should really be called Juliana. She was given the name Julian because at the young age of 18, she renounced the world, and she sought permission and was given permission by the local bishop to enclose herself in a little cell built on the side of the Church of St. Julian in Norwich. I've been there, I've seen it. And she was bricked in, literally, with two openings, one so that she could see the altar and follow the prayers at Mass time, and the other so that she could people could come and speak with her, and it would be the women, you know, the women of the town, of the city, would come and seek her guidance, and she was very young. She was in clothes at the age of 18. At the age of 21, she as good as died. But somehow, and the priest came and gave her the last rites. Everyone, she just assumed she was going to be dead within a couple of hours. But somehow she came through that. And she had one of these profound, I think of it as probably a near-death experience, where Jesus appeared to her and gave her, I think it was 21 instructions. And she spent the rest of her life recording those in a beautiful book. What's it called? Something about divine love. It's her, and so she, because she was a woman. Here's the interesting thing. Nobody knew about her. Just some of the local people knew, but because she was a woman, she never learned Latin, which was the language for writing in those days. She managed to write it in English. And then the book was, it was smug, it was hidden away, because then there was the Reformation came to light in 19th century.
The Reformation came and the book came to light. Oh.
Revelations of the.
The Reformation came and the book came to light.
No, the book is, no, you told me, Krishna has made you tell me. The name of the book is Revelations of Divine Love. Mm-hmm. And the essence of it is Jesus is saying, I love the sinner. I don't see the sin. I just love. That's all. I don't see the sin. The sin is irrelevant. It's very, obviously.
That can be a very dangerous. That can be a very dangerous thing to propagate. That can be misused.
Well, maybe that's why. Yes, I understand. Maybe that's why it kind of was lost. But it turns out that some nuns smuggled it away to France, because during the Reformation, all sacred literatures were destroyed in England. All the monastic libraries were plundered and destroyed. And so it came to light in a private library in France in the 19th century. And it is the first book written in the English language.
Really? Not Chaucer?
Yeah.
Oh.
No.
Oh, Beowulf was there before. That's not really English, is it? Anyway.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about, or what you're talking about, is genuine, deep, mystical experiences of God.
Absolutely. Oh. And I would hasten to say, a very personal idea of God. Had they known, had Prabhupada come in those days, that wasn't Krishna's plan, but had he come, maybe people would have realized this is the God we're loving. But it wasn't to happen at that time. So it's a sort of, the only image they really had was of Jesus. And of course, a beautiful image of a loving person. And I think that one of the great things that Christianity has, that Jesus actually gave in his teachings, is love of your fellow humans. He stressed that enormously. And the essential teaching, as you will know, that Jesus gave and is repeated more than once in the records of his life, is love the Lord thy God with your heart and soul and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that in that instruction, love God, love your neighbor, love yourself, is encapsulated something very sublime. And of course, many of the followers of Jesus down through the centuries, they made that the center of their life. There were others, as there are in every religious tradition, who turned it to their own, obviously, to their own advantage and so on. And I, as I say, I feel very sad. Some of the things that happened, not just in India, but in different parts of the world, there's of course the whole history of Christianity in England, in India is woven through with misuse. And Prabhupada, he learned from the ministers of the Church of Scotland. Well, the Church of Scotland is Presbyterian, and that's a very strict form of Christianity. One of the, one of the doctrines of the original Presbyterian Church, I don't know how much they would stand by this now, is that there is a certain number of souls who get salvation. I think it's 144,000.
Jehovah's Witness.
Well, there's something else.
Yeah, so they have a similar idea, don't they?
Yeah, but anyway, it's 144,000 souls who will get to heaven, and the rest will simply, I don't know what, they'll just vanish or burn in hell or something.
Well, that's something I've always found horrifying. The idea that God burns you in hell forever. I think there's a lot of revulsion among the people in the Western world, especially young people nowadays, of this idea. Maybe more in America, because my experience, I grew up in the Catholic tradition also, but we were more or less all agnostic. We didn't have any. I didn't really have any spiritual experiences. But in America, this hard-line Christianity, it's been a lot of people. They just feel really turned off by it. The idea that God burns you in hell forever. It's
yeah. Well, the thing is, Prabhu, it's something that most people can respond to. They want, they want boundaries. They want rules. They want to know what they can't do. And there's this profound psychology of guilt and shame, which is woven through almost all conditioned beings. And so to be told by your religion, whether it be Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, to be told that you are a sinner and that you must be punished, is something that many people will respond to that. And don't forget, that the Bhagavatam has its own accounts of hellish punishments, which Prabhupada never dwelt on. He never even spoke about them. And we were all taken completely by surprise when the 5th canto came out. We didn't even know about that stuff. It was hinted at a little bit in the 3rd canto. But it was something that
Sampradaya is not emphasized that much. It does say that by chanting the holy names, you become free from more sins than you can commit.
Yeah.
I suppose that was a big thing for a lot of people, but it doesn't seem to be definitely in Krishna consciousness, as especially as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Prabhupada gave it to us. The love is emphasized more than retribution for sins, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, human psychology, being what it is, even those who have taken to the path of Krishna consciousness sometimes can be heard. I've heard them talking about the hellish punishments and this and that. Fine, if that works for you, that's a fear-based religion, essentially. It's fear-based. But ultimately, of course, you're absolutely right. What Lord Chaitanya came to teach was love-based. And that's what the Goswamis also.
And all the personalities you've been talking about, the Saint Julian of Norwich and Thomas à Kempis and Francis of Assisi and Saint John of the Cross and Saint Teresa of Avila, they connected with that love, right?
Yeah.
They got that.
Yeah, and don't forget that during the lifetime of most of those, the teachings of the church were all about hell and punishment. Every church in certainly in Britain, every single church, when you go to and don't forget that pretty much every village in this country has a parish church.
Yeah.
So when you go in the church and you're in what we call the aisle, the main hall, and you turn towards the altar, and there's an arch, right? that separates the altar area from the rest of the space. And on that arch, before the Reformation, every single church had painted, it's called the Doom painting.
Oh.
The Doom image. On your left-hand side are the saints offering prayers. At the top is Jesus, the Son of God. And on the right, on your right, are the sinners, the cursed, falling down to hell, and there's the demons waiting to capture them. And a large amount of the preaching that was done every Sunday, which you had to attend for fear of losing your house, practically, if you didn't attend the Sunday sermon, a large part of that was threats of punishment that would await you if you didn't say your prayers. So, it was in the middle of that Julian of Norwich, and that was also, she was alive at the beginning of that whole series of plagues and, pandemics that spread all over Europe for 300 years. People were dying everywhere. The church was teaching hell and brimstone, and she, was an exceptional person. And there were others, no doubt, like her, who saw that ultimately. Pardon me?
There may have been many who are forgotten. They didn't make it into. They were unknown. It may be.
Absolutely. My good friend Martin, who's a lifelong Christian, he told me, he knows a lot about Christian religion. He told me the first 400 years of Christianity in England, not a single name remains. We don't know who they were.
Well, in one sense, that's very inspiring. Again, getting back to that point, that there may be so many devotees like yourself who are, they're not big figures, they're not the movers and shakers in ISKCON, but they're there. So that may be very inspiring to many devotees. That the real thing is to get there, and it doesn't matter what your external appearance is, but it's your link with Krishna. That's the real thing.
Well, as you said, Krishna is in our hearts. And Krishna never leaves us. Never leaves us. As once I have, somehow or another, by cosmic, causeless mercy, I've somehow been awakened. And just once said, Lord, let me be yours. Even though in the way of things, that forgetfulness comes and distraction, and the path is never smooth. But Krishna will never forget that I have made that intention. As he says, and that lovely passage in the Gita where Arjuna says, what happens if I get lost, And Krishna said, then, basically Krishna says, don't worry, because I'll always come back and remind you. That's essentially, isn't it, in the 6th chapter? Beautiful passage.
Right.
And I remember hearing a talk Prabhupada gave. I think it's recorded in one of his little books, Perfection of Yoga, perhaps, or something, which is based on his lectures on the 6th chapter. And he's talking about this, and how you will be reminded and you'll be able to continue, and because you may make 1% advancement, and next life you'll begin from 2%, So he was giving this talk to the devotees in Los Angeles, I think. And then he said, so now you have been reminded, Krishna has brought you back. So this time, don't, forget. Even though he says, failure is the pillar of success.
Forever.
But, we are eternal beings. It may not be overnight. Who knows?
So we can continue. How are you doing time-wise? Am I overstretching you? This is really good. And this really, I'm enlivened very much by this discussion. But I don't want to overstretch you or whatever. I do want to.
And it's not an imposition on my time at all. I mean, how often do we get to speak? I don't think it's probably the longest conversation we've ever had.
It probably is, and it's probably the profoundest also. Now, one thing you were saying is that you don't have that outgoing capacity. Not everyone has that. Of course, you did in your youth, but we don't all remain youths forever. But one thing, you have so much to offer. You're going to share it by writing, we pray. But it just seems to me a pity that you, how do I put it? You know what I'm getting at, right? That you
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I've always found it quite hard. Once I'm in position, and there's people in front of me, I can talk. I can communicate, and I know you're absolutely right that I have been given that capacity. It's just my own lack of dedication, I'm afraid, Prabhu, that it takes a lot to get me out there. It's not easy for me. What can I say? And there have been times, when I've been persuaded or by various reasons to come out and teach. And I've always appreciated doing it, but it drains me. It's not easy for me. Yeah.
In what way does it drain you?
I can't really understand it. It's the energy of communicating. If I'm, I mean, you will know what I'm talking about, but I think you have a greater resilience, much far greater resilience. You must do. Plus, you've got courage and determination, which these are not among my capacities.
We're all different individuals, right?
Yeah. It may be that one of the prices, that a person has to pay in order to be in order to be able to open up, because for me, I think it's a lot to do with opening up, that communication. It's less to do with just repeating stuff. It's to do with opening up. And one of the prices to have that side of one is that one is easily oppressed by the world. I don't know. I can't explain it. I can't explain it, other than I'm a fallen soul. And I do feel called upon always. I wish I could do more.
Well, maybe we should have the devotees start to harass you via the internet.
Yeah, well, once in a while. I've done a few of these Zoom things, and again, I don't find them easy at all. But I don't think anyone does, do they? Zoom is a strange. Although this is lovely, but in general, Zoom is
we have a long-standing relationship. Also, it's not the same as being in front of someone you never saw or knew. Something like that. That is something that Satsvarupa Maharaj discusses in some of his older writings, that the seeming conflict between the inner life and the outer duties of a preacher. And what about you've cultivated a very rich inner life, and most of those who you've mentioned, they weren't what we call outgoing preachers. San Francisco of Assisi was different. He was a very outgoing person also, but most of them it was them and God, right? Mostly, They weren't teachers so much.
That's right. I mean, St. Francis, of course, spent long periods of time in deep solitary prayer.
I didn't know.
Well, the famous stigmata which he received. He had a vision of Jesus, and the vision gave him this stigmata. That was during a long period of solitary, intense, austere meditation in a cave in the mountains, But I don't know that much about St. Francis. I've read, a few books about him, but stuff doesn't retain in my my brain doesn't hold things in the way it never did, actually, to tell you the truth. I never had a very sharp memory all my life, but yeah. It is, of course, we all have before us the example of Srila Prabhupada, who never wasted a moment, constantly teaching and working to spread Krishna consciousness. And it's a very awesome example he gave us. And I find sometimes I feel a bit overwhelmed, actually, that Prabhupada did so much, and I think, I can't do that. But then there's other sides to Prabhupada. He did have intimate, loving dealings occasionally with his disciples. Mostly, he didn't want to be pulled into that because he had this mission. And so it seems to me, that I'm speaking personally here, that as a consequence, many of those, or some of those, who were attracted to Prabhupada were similarly very motivated to be missionaries. But that's only one way of serving Krishna. It is a very important way, but it's not the only way, as you were pointing out. And in fact, the inner life, without the inner life, what are you going to share with people?
Yeah. And clearly, Prabhupada, he was very active, and he was a brilliant organizer and a motivator, but he couldn't have done what he did if he didn't have a obviously very deep love of Krishna, and he communicated that. It wasn't some doctrine, dogma, or some political program or something like that. He communicated love of Krishna, to what capacity we could absorb. But even in our very neophyte capacity, it was so meaningful to us that people just they did amazing things with great faith in Srila Prabhupada. That was it. We praise him for his working hard and not to undermine him, but there are many people who work hard, but it was what he had to give was love of Krishna, and he communicated that. He was, in other words, he was very deep internally, obviously. Also, we might just be running around like working, but he was doing that with a very deep love of Krishna.
Well, what Prabhupada understood, and what he wanted us to also understand, is that it wasn't him. It was Krishna. I mean, he always credited, didn't he, his Guru Maharaj. That's what he always did. But the reality is, it was Krishna coming through him.
Yeah.
And each of us, although we are not, I just feel tiny by comparison, but each of us can be a channel for Krishna to come through. And sometimes without our knowing it, that's exactly what happens. I think what Prabhupada told me in the only letter that survives, I had 3 letters from Prabhupada, but only one survives. And he said, don't manufacture anything of your own. Just repeat what you have heard. He knew me very well.
It was a general instruction to everyone that he gave repeatedly, isn't it?
It is, but I took that very personally. I can't help it. I mean, I have a creative mind, and so I hear what Prabhupada has told me, and I want to put it in my own words, and that's just I can't help it. Not to replace his.
Well, Prabhupada also said to do that, right? In one of the early purports in the Srimad Bhagavatam, he talks about realization means, I can't remember exactly the words, it's a very important statement. He said means realization means to present what you've heard with it may not be exactly the same words, but it's presenting what you understand, what you've heard, without changing it, and that's realization.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It's in one of the very early purports in the Bhagavatam.
Yeah. In fact, when I felt somehow encouraged and inspired to do my own edition of the Bhagavad Gita back this was 25 years ago. So I was very hesitant. Did I dare to tread on such holy ground, so to speak? So I made a a sample chapter 2, and I sent it to a handful of highly valued and respected God brothers. And I got unanimous support and encouragement from them. So I went ahead. And halfway through, I didn't know how I was ever going to complete this. Suddenly, a publisher showed up out of nowhere and said, I would like to publish this for you. So I went ahead, and the first edition was went out of print eventually, so I republished it myself about 10, 15 years ago. But what kept me going was I came across this sentence that Prabhupada put in his commentary in Bhagavad Gita. And in fact, I'll show it to you. I got it right here, as it happened. You won't be able to read it probably, but I have this favorite picture of Prabhupada wearing his Radhe Shyam Harinam Chadar and with his hand in his bead bag. And underneath, you won't be able to read it, but what it says in quotation.
Any commentary?
It says,
any commentary on the Gita following in the footsteps of Arjuna is real devotional service. Jai.
Yeah, that's it. It's where he's talking about Arjuna can understand what Krishna is saying because he's Krishna's devotee. If you're not Krishna's devotee, you won't understand the Bhagavad Gita. And then he says those words. So I took that very personally. That there is room,
It's amazing how Prabhupada speaks some line in his books, which others may just go over. Yeah, that's the philosophy. But for others, it becomes the something which it's the direction for their very life.
Yeah, that's right. That's all we need, just a few words. And in those few words, a whole lifetime can be engaged. It doesn't need to be. This is the thing, isn't it, about the truth? It doesn't need to be complicated. Yeah.
One technical question: that conversation that with Srila Prabhupada and the Baha'i, that is that in the Veda base? Do you know is that in the public domain?
Well, it must be somehow because the BBT sent it. I had never been able. I couldn't find it. I searched for it many times, but I think they probably enlarged their database since then. So it was in July 1973. It's not recorded. It's not in the It's not in the published. No, it's not in the published. The conversations books. It's not in those. But now I'm sure it'll be online. I would expect.
Oh, I'll check that out later because I'm in regular contact with Ekanath Prabhu at the archives, and they're doing a superb service there. So we want everything that Prabhupada said, and we want to, well, especially they're doing is to preserve that. It's so valuable. Now,
yeah, well, I made my own transcript, so if it's required, I can send it. Yeah.
Oh, very good, very nice. Now, getting back to what we might say a more external consideration, how did your father take to your taking to Krishna consciousness after he'd groomed you to be a good Catholic? It seems to me he wasn't grooming you to be a good Catholic just formally, but he really wanted you to get the real thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing about I always remember about my father, he taught me how to pray. You know, every night before we went to bed, me and my 3 sisters, we would all kneel together on the floor in one of the bedrooms, and he would gather us around him with his arms, holding us all 3 or 4. At the beginning it was 3, and then when my younger sister was old enough, all 4. And he would lead us through a simple prayers every night. And one of my 3 sisters, still to this day, she never stopped saying those prayers. When I was about 14, I guess, probably 14 or 15, I remember one night I was kneeling to say my prayers without, by that time I was doing it on my own. And I thought to myself, I know this is important, but I really find it such a drag. I'm going to take it up later in life. For now, I'll put it to one side. So I got out of the habit, but he taught that. So anyway, what did he feel? He was deeply upset when I gave him one of Prabhupada's little books, and he said I've read it, and he said I really don't like it. I disapprove of it. This man is not speaking, good English. He said some very unpleasant things about Prabhupada. So he never supported my being a devotee. And one time, after I built, the temple in Soho Street, I wanted to show it to him. So he agreed to come. So he agreed to set foot inside the front door. He agreed to climb up the stairs, go inside the temple. He flatly refused to enter the temple. And that was the way.
He flatly refused, sorry, I missed that. To enter the temple?
To enter the temple room. He went up the stairs, but he wouldn't go any further. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. He was a religious. Pardon me?
Nothing to do with taking the shoes off. That wasn't the matter.
I don't think that's what prevented him. It was, I think he felt that I had been stolen, from my authentic tradition and true spirituality. And, I guess he saw it as a cult even then. I mean, that was close to 10 years after I became a Krishna devotee. He never made his peace with that. The rest of my family, they all respect what I've done, but he never did. Which is sad. Yeah. So that, of course, that didn't deter me in the slightest, but it did mean, we all have to, at some point, I feel, make our peace with our families.
So another thing is, you were saying you made relationships with Christian ministers. You were doing that from a very early time. You were in Manchester and you were being invited to speak in different places.
We chanted at the Sunday Mass at the local church.
That's very open-minded of them, because at that time, I didn't join till quite a bit later, 75. You joined in 1970, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's only 5 years, but the movement had really evolved a huge amount in those 5 years, both in England and throughout the world. But still, it was considered something really odd and by a lot of people antisocial and occult and all that kind of thing. So it must have been really intense. In 1971, probably, you went to Manchester, but still there were Christians who were open-minded enough to at least prima facie recognize that there's something real here, or something, God is here.
Well, yeah, our local Church of England vicar.
You're talking in Manchester now?
In 1971, in Salford, which is Manchester, Greater Manchester, our local Church of England vicar, he practiced yoga.
That was quite unusual in those days.
Yes, I guess. And he had longish hair, you know. There was a different mood in. He was, a young man. There was a different mood in the country in those days. Someone like him could flourish in the Church of England. He invited us to do kirtan on Sunday in his church. You're being distracted by the mosquito, I know.
It's all right. I'm just, So how was that received?
So, well, very well. I mean, at the end of the Sunday service, their tradition was that everyone would mingle at the back of the church and have a cup of tea. You know. So prior to that, he said, "I've got some special guests, special friends here, and they're going to sing to Krishna for us." And so we all sang, and they really appreciated it. And he had in his vicarage, he had a gestetner. Do you remember those? I don't know. It's like a little hand printing press. Yeah. You actually have to turn the handle to make it work. Yeah, so we printed lots of leaflets on that. He was very happy to help us. But he was not that unusual. I went to many Christian establishments, including, a couple of seminaries and colleges, and gave many talks. And they were always absolutely intrigued, fascinated. They found it, very positive. Yeah.
Isn't it amazing that you?
But I think.
Yeah, go on. You didn't.
Well, what happened? I think it's very clear to me that it really started more in America than in England, but it crossed the Atlantic. That because of devotees, but also this happened in England, because devotees were working the streets and confronting people. In the beginning, it was to distribute magazines and to sing, and that was okay. I don't think I never felt much resistance to that. I felt there was more of an appreciation. But once it turned into heavy, sales, which was pushed by the leaders, it wasn't really coming from the bottom. I think it was coming from above. It gradually began to alienate people more and more. And that was going on even more intensely in America. And so late 74, I think it's when it started, there started to be this pushback, mainly from the fundamentalist Christian people. And they started to, call us a cult and accuse us of...
Yeah, go on.
Okay, I heard that.
I'm getting distracted by a little mosquito here. Yeah.
I know.
Just see how Maya comes. Finished. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then began the anti-cult movement, which became very heavy. And I think for the next 10 years, across the Atlantic, it was in the papers. They would find that, how journalists can. They can find the negative, and of course the negative is there, because we're all human, and we don't have, we don't get it right, and there was a lot of fanaticism, amongst devotees. Sometimes maybe there even is now still, but it was much stronger there. It wasn't restrained at all by the leaders. And when I say the leaders, I'm not necessarily talking about the people at the very top. I think sometimes they were enlightened people, but it's like the middle management, the ones who had to pay the bills, basically. The ones who had to pay the bills, and they had no source of income other than hustling people. So then things did begin to change, sadly. But personally, I very rarely encounter, to this day, I very rarely encounter any animosity from people. I'm always very straightforward about, who I am, what I am. And I generally speaking, 90% of the time I encounter a very positive response.
I remember one time you went to Eton College and did a program there. You came back and told us how you were chanting down, and you said, I don't think they'll invite us back again.
Well, it was actually Harrow. It wasn't Eton, it was Harrow, which is very similar. They wear unusual costume at Harrow. They have stiff collars and long tail coats and stuff. And we kind of caused a sensation. Yeah, we did. There was another more significant occasion, which was after in England, the order of significance is Eton, number 2 is Harrow, and number 3 is Winchester. So I got to know, I was invited actually at the temple by the chaplain of Winchester College, Winchester School, down near in the direction of Southampton. I guess in Berkshire, actually. So I took
Winchester, Dorset, maybe, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So we took. When I was in charge of the temple, I took 3 or 4 devotees with me, and a whole pile of books. And we didn't have a great supply of many books to distribute, so we had some smallish books, I think mostly for sale, and some Bhakti Godhead magazines. But I wanted them to see the range of Prabhupada's output. So I took a whole big display of the Srimad Bhagavatam, individual volumes, many of the volumes of the Bhagavatam and other books that Prabhupada had produced. So we made a big display. So anyway, what happened was we were invited by the chaplain to sing at the Sunday Mass. Now, the Sunday Mass at Winchester College, the entire school, not just the students, but the entire establishment, all the staff, everyone was there. The place was packed, about 600 people.
At the cathedral?
Winchester College.
Yeah, okay.
It's a public school.
In the cathedral, though. Okay, just
no, they're not in the city of Winchester at all. They've got their own spread somewhere out in the countryside. Yeah. So they have in the church they have tiered seating either side of the aisle, and it was packed. So Nicholas Henshaw, the man's name, similar sort of thing. He did his service, and then he invited us up into the raised area in front of the altar, and he introduced me. And he said, "Now my friend Ranchor and his devotee friends, they're going to sing to us." And so we got our mridangas and kartals, and we sang. I spoke, not for long, 5 or 10 minutes, and then Nicholas said, "Now anyone of you who want to meet these people, you come to my room out in the quadrangle afterwards, and you can have a cup of coffee and you can meet them." So as we left the church, there was a row of the senior members of staff, ending in the headmaster, who was the brother of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they were lookalikes. His name was Fisher. That's all I remember. But he was It was odd. It was like meeting the Archbishop of Canterbury, but actually it was his brother. And so they all shook our hands very profusely and said, "Thank you very much. Wonderful to have had you." And off you go. So then as we went out into the courtyard near the church, it was crammed with boys. You could hardly move. And Nicholas said, "Look, I'm sorry, but there's so many people want to speak with you. We can't all fit in my room." So what I've managed to do is I've managed to commandeer the sixth form common room. And unusually, it's never normally open to the rest of the school, but we're opening it up. We've got special permission, and we're all going to meet there. So we spent 2 hours there with at least 100 boys, at least. And all those books which I brought. Are you okay there?
Yeah.
You're having a battle.
Yeah, go on. All the books you brought?
Every single one of them was sold. Now, boys were running out. Some boys, they wanted to buy, Canto 2, Volume 3 of the Bhagavatam or whatever it was. And they didn't have enough money. So Nicholas said, "That's okay. I'll write out a check and you owe me the money." So in that way, every single book, hundreds of books actually, were sold. And here's the thing. 2 weeks later at the temple in London on the Saturday, I spotted 2 or 3 boys from the school that come to visit. And so I went and talked to them and said, "Oh, did you hear what happened?" I said, "No." He said, 3 days after you left, the headmaster announced that all books that had come from the Krishna people had to be handed in and would be destroyed. And any boy found with one of those books would be expelled. Yeah.
So they were visiting on the fear of being expelled. They'd probably be expelled if it was known that they'd visited you.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So luckily, 2 or 3 years later, Nicholas managed to find. He got transferred to another wonderful school called Sevenoaks School, which is a big public school. And he became the long-term chaplain there. And I used to go there every year and got on really well with everyone. And one year they had a thing called the Lent visitor. Every Lent, they would have some sort of religious personality would come and stay and would spend a whole week going around all the houses in the school, giving personal talks and connecting with all the pupils. And so one year I was that person, and the headmaster put me up in his house. I stayed as a guest in his house. I toured the entire school for a week with my tambura everywhere, sitting and singing and taking questions. And I think it was there was a very deep connection was created. Yeah.
And you're saying you're not an outgoing person?
No, like I say, I have that side to me, and you're right to single that out because I have that side to me. But there's a price to pay. But I think it's particularly somehow my own lacking. It's my own failing. I haven't managed to keep up with all of that.
That's very, very sad, the story you told from Winchester. Very, very sad.
Yeah.
As institutional needs or whatever over real spiritual.
Well, most of a high percentage of the graduates from Winchester they will go on to Oxford and Cambridge. It's the seat of establishment. The establishment of this country is crooked to the very core. That's the way it is. It doesn't mean that there's not many good people in it. There are, who somehow found a way through. But the essence of it is very, very deeply, I think, I was going to say is almost demonic. I mean, I'm not a fanatic like that at all, but there is something very nasty But that doesn't mean that there's not everywhere amazing people. You know, I mean, there are. So we mustn't.
Especially in the 1970s, it seems we were connecting with amazing people, and that's the teaching of Krishna that Prabhupada gave us, that everyone ultimately is an amazing person. The soul is amazing, and we were connecting like that. Are we still doing that? Does it happen? Miracles happen all the time, but it seems that they were really flowing like a daily occurrence almost in the 1970s. You like to comment on that?
Well, I think it is still going on. Probably as much as it ever did. I mean, but it's not so structured now, and perhaps that's not a bad thing. You know, the structure here in this country, of course, is in two halves, really, because you've got the London sort of based Hinduized side, which is not without merit at all. I mean, there's some fantastic stuff goes on there. But what you've also got is out in the different parts of the country, in the north of England and in Wales, in the Midlands, and you've got local communities of devotees who are mostly absolutely local people. You know, they're not usually much Hindu evidence in them, but they're all small scale because there's no real sense of direction, I think. I don't know. I mean, I to be honest, I couldn't really find my place. I couldn't find a place where I could function in the society sort of by the end of the 80s. I had fallen out of love very much with the society. I never lost my faith in Krishna consciousness or in Prabhupada, but I couldn't get along with the mood.
That's quite a long time. That's 30 years, huh?
Yeah, well, so I just went my own way, you know, and Krishna's kept me very occupied.
Yeah, you've done very well. You've written a lot of books. You've done in Vrindavan. You were involved in that World Wildlife Fund or something.
Yeah,
Orissa. I wasn't aware of what you were doing in Orissa. You spent quite some time in Orissa also. Yeah, that's Krishna consciousness is not all within the walls of ISKCON, that's for sure. In Glastonbury, there are many devotees who have migrated there from different parts of England.
Glastonbury, it's a different situation because
it's a spiritual hub, isn't it? It's been for hundreds of years.
It's going back, you know, nearly 2,000 years, but
2,000.
Well, yeah, because the story. I mean, the local mythology, you could say, but it's strongly believed.
Jesus.
Absolutely, as William Blake wrote.
Times walk on England's pastures. Yeah, go on.
Exactly. And you know how much evidence there is for that. Of course, there's very little, but nevertheless, it's part of the Glastonbury tradition. And it's what made the abbey in Glastonbury, the monastery in Glastonbury, it's what made it the greatest monastery in the Northern Europe. And people came from all over Northern Europe on pilgrimage to Glastonbury. And so, you know, when the Reformation came, it was the marked target for the Reformation. And famously, you know, the abbot of the monastery was taken with two of the senior monks to the top of the hill here in Glastonbury Tor and hung in public, executed. So, you know, that left a very, very bitter taste. However, Glastonbury, it's got its own story of being a sacred place, and I feel that whenever I come here, all my life, whenever I've come to Glastonbury, I've always felt this special presence But then something very specific happened within the ISKCON history, which is when Jayatirtha separated from our society. He, at some point, he told his disciples in England to congregate in Glastonbury. So a good number of them came.
The Glastonbury devotee community, that was the beginning of it, is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
And of course, being the followers of Jayatirtha, they were wedded to intoxication. That was part of their practice. To acid, to take LSD, and also to smoke marijuana was integral to their practice. But they were also very attached to chanting Hare Krishna. And then another thing happened back in, I guess, the late 90s, that there was a local Englishman who went to India and he met a Babaji in Vrindavan. He's, what's he called? I think at that time he was known by the nickname of Pagal Baba. And which means mad or crazy or something, I think, Pagal.
Yeah, Pagal Baba.
And he's
famous, yeah.
Yeah, he built that large, which I think now has been finished, I think, that sort of high, which is quite a remarkable achievement, actually. I was once taken there and saw what he was doing. It wasn't to be belittled, but he started coming to Glastonbury, and he started making followers. And he turned a blind...
The Englishman?
Pagal Baba.
Pagal
Baba. He was invited... Yeah, he was invited by... No, sorry, not Pagal Baba. A disciple of Pagal Baba, whose name was Vinod Bihari. No, he was Indian. His name was Vinod Bihari. And the Englishman brought him to Glastonbury, and he began to make disciples. And the secret of it...
Vinod Bihari was Indian or English?
Yes. He was Indian. He was a Babaji he was a member of, I think he was a member of the exiled Bengali community who, after the Bangladesh war, were resettled in Madhya Pradesh.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
But he was among them. He had a great reputation as being a spiritual man. But he was Babaji, and, he believed in all of the things that they believe in. I forget what the name of that initiation is that gives you your identity as a gopi, that sort of thing. But he made quite successful inroads into the Krishna community here because...
In Glastonbury or in Britain in general?
Just in Glastonbury. And the reason was because he had no problem with them taking drugs. For him, that was cool. He never, so they were all doing that, and he was there with them and happy. And I believe he had some other unsavory practices, which I can't really talk about. I don't know for sure, but that's the word. Anyhow, he died in a road accident about 12 years ago. I met him once. He came to the London Temple, and I spotted this guy with an assistant down in the temple, and I saw he looks like some kind of authentic character. And so I invited him upstairs, and we chatted for a bit. Chatted, talked, yeah. And I gave him prasadam, and he left. So a few years later, he died in a road accident, I think in India, and he was survived by his young disciple, who he had adopted from the age of 11 and brought up and educated. And that man is now known as Raman Bihari. And he comes to Glastonbury every summer, and he's initiated hundreds, because he has no requirement. He just give you a name as soon as look at you. And so there is a quite extensive Krishna community sort of scattered. Glastonbury is the sort of the headquarters of it, but it's scattered around the west of England. And they all love to chant. They love to chant, but they also love to smoke dope. And they're quite happy to chant other mantras to other, they like to chant to Shiva, to Durga, and so on.
Sounds like the kind of thing I had a lot of experience with in Bangladesh when in the 1980s. People who love to chant, but they don't follow principles, and they're not interested in following principles.
Yeah, I find it challenging because I do want to appreciate the fact that they like to chant Krishna's names. I can't
It's a great
have one
gift,
come.
isn't it? It's a great gift.
Yeah.
It's unusual.
And most of them are gentle people, and they sometimes, of course, the last 6 months I haven't done any public teaching, but prior to that, I was teaching twice a week, and they would come to my talks for a while, and then they tend to sort of drop out after a bit when they saw it was getting a bit serious. So for me, it's a complete puzzle. I don't know really how to interact with them at all. So I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure how long we'll stay here in Glastonbury now. It's a lovely place for me to live, and surrounded by the countryside. I didn't like to live in the middle of London for all those years, 30 years in that house. But let's see what Krishna wants. If it's Krishna.
Yeah.
Go on. I once asked Prabhupada, in the service of Krishna, when there's different opportunities one is being presented with, how do you choose? And Prabhupada just immediately shot back at me. Choice? You have no choice. You do what Krishna gives you.
That was Prabhupada. Wow.
Yeah, that's it.
So,
there was no question of me then following that up with, oh, Prabhupada, what do you mean by that? That was it.
don't argue with that. You don't argue with that, yeah.
But then actually I did follow it up, because my recollection is I didn't leave his room immediately. He was sort of packing up and getting ready to go somewhere, and I was sort of there on my own while he went in and out of the room getting his things, and preparing himself. And I said, Prabhupada, I know that you have given clear orders to some of your disciples, to do a particular thing. Have you any such instruction for me? Because I was thinking about what he just said. You do what Krishna gives you. So have you anything to give me? And Prabhupada looked at me and said, somehow or other, preach. That is all. And then he left the room. I think he knew me. He could see, obviously Prabhupada could see into your heart and into your mind. He understood everyone. Just instantly, he could understand. It would not be a good idea for him to give me a specific. Anyway, he just gave me what Krishna told him to give me. And that has actually profoundly shaped my whole understanding of life on earth. That, a lot of the time I think that I'm choosing something, but actually it's Krishna is just giving me this. This is to now do this, and to see the presence of Krishna. As you said earlier about what Julian of Norwich said, that Jesus doesn't see the sin. That sort of philosophy, it could be misused to say, well, in that case, I'll just do anything I want, and Krishna gave it to me. It requires, sincerity to really live by that. So, I guess I constantly pray, Krishna, please, guide me and show me.
So, Ranchor Prabhu, my next question for you is, you said how in Manchester, when you went there, that you were giving talks and churches, invited like that. Now, that's a wonderful, amazing thing that you're a very young man at that time, and you were giving talks to people who were now. You said how you were being invited regularly in Manchester, and you were a young man and young in devotional service, and we didn't really know much in those days compared to what we know. And we've had the opportunity to read Srila Prabhupada's books for decades now. And it wasn't just you, but there were so many devotees all over the world. They were going and speaking in universities and speaking to, in the church, it means to vicars who had been trained for years in seminaries, and still you were able to speak in a lucid way and make an impression that that you really had something, and there was philosophically sound. That's an amazing gift of Srila Prabhupada, that he could communicate. That young devotees without that much knowledge, if we look back on it, they were able to make an impression by their speaking to people who are very learned in their own traditions. Would you like to speak a little bit about that from your own personal experience?
Yeah, just a minute.
You've got the old Bhagavad Gita.
That's right. If for the first 2 years of my devotional life, this is what we had. And it's about 300 pages.
The Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, just over 300 pages. But abridged, that's right. With an introduction by Allen Ginsberg and Thomas Merton.
Yeah.
And
go on.
Yeah. And in addition, we had the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the original one, which was very hard to understand, actually, a lot of it, but it carried an energy, I guess. And then from 1972, summer 72, Prabhupada came to London, and he launched pretty much it there in London, I think. He introduced us to the new edition of the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, but nicely published, to the standard he wanted. And then gradually in the following, I think already actually the previous year, we began to get chapters of the second canto, just one chapter at a time. I still have some of those. So that's what we had. And we had an extra devotion. We had Krishna book and Ishapanishad. For my own feeling is it was easier then. Now there's such a profusion of scriptures. For me, it was much simpler and easier with just those 5 basic books. And that's all we need. That's more than what we needed, I think, actually. More than we needed. Because it's not a question of learning. No, I don't think that ever really changed anyone's heart, actually. It's the voice that comes through, Prabhupada's voice. And you could hear that in any line of his books, but perhaps the earlier writings had, a sort of urgency and a power that I won't say his later writings don't have it, but it's very easily discernible in his early writings, I would say. So we weren't lacking anything. And what we had, of course, was the single leadership of Srila Prabhupada. And that's what transformed everything, because he spoke through us and we served him, and there was no confusion. After he left, of course, things became more blurred. Not straight away, but didn't take long, did it? Within a couple of years already, there were splits occurring and arguments and this and that. But that's life, We can't. I mean, I don't think we should undervalue that living in this material world, you're going to encounter that. And either it can break you or it can make you. If you're willing to, hold on and not to nurture. I mean, I suppose the most important thing is not to allow the weeds, of pride and envy and all those things, not to allow them to be nourished. I'll never forget when I first learned Lord Chaitanya speaking to, I think, Sanatan, that the chanting of the holy name can also water the weeds. Now there's a puzzle. There's something to make you stop in your tracks, I thought at the time. Yeah. So we were lucky in that opening period, the first sort of 10 years of ISKCON, because there were no complications really. Of course, there was still human conflict was there then as well, but Prabhupada was there to deal with it. After he left, it became so much more complicated.
Yeah, and continues to be.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah.
That's also an advantage of distancing yourself in some ways from the official movement. Not that you're inimical toward it, but there's some distance from that, and then you can concentrate on the essence.
Well, I do. Yeah, I do actually feel, you're quite right, I feel that if I were in the midst of that, it would destroy me. I wouldn't, or put it this way, I would have to run away again. I can't be in the midst of that. Some people have that gift. They can somehow detach themselves from the superficial, and they may even be drawn into arguments and struggles and so on, but they can maintain their basic determination and intention. I don't think I could do that, actually. I tried it for 15 years, nearly 20 years. I tried it.
It was very hard in England. I think it was Krishna's mercy on me that I left just before all that happened. I have very good memories of Jayatirtha. He was so nice, but unfortunately, in the period after I left, there was so much turbulence in the British Krishna consciousness movement with Jayatirtha and then Bhagawan, and it was really, really, it was a very, very hard time, no doubt. It's a great credit to so many devotees that they survived all of that, as you have, and their faith in Krishna never decreased, despite so much turbulence. And it seems to me most of the devotees, the Prabhupada disciples in Britain, they remained in Krishna consciousness. Those who joined in prior to Srila Prabhupada's departure, most of them are still, if they haven't left this world, they're still serious in Krishna consciousness. You mentioned some of the names there.
Yeah, a good percentage are. I don't know about most. I mean, Prabhupada initiated 300 disciples based in Britain, about roughly 100 women and 200 men, and who are still sort of visible. There'll be plenty that are serious about their Krishna consciousness who are not visible. The ones who are still visible, it would be less than 100 for sure. But then there's maybe another 100. I'm just speaking very broad terms, who are still devotees in good faith, and then there'll be about 100 who just kind of
Well, many of them they left early on. They didn't really make a long-term commitment to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, actually, I'm just thinking, if we're talking about disciples of Prabhupada, it may be actually a better proportion than that, because they have the connection. It's the second generation. They're the ones that had
that
had
whole
to struggle.
experience with Tirtha and Bhagavan was devastating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really devastating. What a great. Anyway, it happened,
and believe me, I mean, I wish I could be able to do more to give sort of support and inspiration to all those hundreds and thousands, actually. But I have limitations. I can't do it. Maybe something will shift. I don't know. Yeah.
So just I don't have that much more to say. Anything else you'd like to add? I mean, there must be hundreds and thousands of things, but it's just not coming now.
Yes, I mean, only to say that for me, as time goes by, the task becomes simpler, less complicated. It's the essence, it's the fundamentals that matter. And one thing I've learned, this is a personal journey I've been on, I've learned to trust in Prabhupada and Krishna, that they love me regardless. You know, because I did place great store on proper behavior and so on. But after I passed my 60th birthday, I couldn't keep it up for much longer. And I began to feel a deep sense of failure. But then, and it's not said that's gone, there is a sense of failure, but then I realized that Prabhupada is not measuring. He accepts, as does Krishna, of course. But Prabhupada also, he's full of mercy. He only sees the good. He's not judging, which is something that, you know, I have the tendency to pass judgment on others, but Prabhupada was not like that. For the purposes of establishing his mission, sometimes he may have appeared to pass judgment, you know, temporarily on this or that person. But in reality, he never judged anyone. He just appreciated whatever we brought to give. So that becomes very important to me now, and not to waste my time and energy dwelling on the failings. I'm not just talking about devotees. I'm talking about in everyone. You know, to see the positive, not in a sentimental way, but in a true way. To see that each and every being is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna, and to appreciate that aspect, you know, the good, the true. Yeah. And not just in others, but in myself also. I mean, I don't want to become so, filled with feelings of guilt or shame or whatever, that I just lose my will to continue. I think we all need support and encouragement. We all need it, and including ourselves.
Yeah, I was saying that as a quote unquote preacher, I have to tell devotees that it's not just what you feel in your heart, but you have to do, you have to follow. And the idea is just that, well, Prabhupada loves us, so we can do whatever. Well, it can be misused also. But then again, there are so many devotees who they want to be Krishna conscious, but the reality is, and we're all in that situation to a greater or lesser extent, is that we are struggling with the mind and the senses, and we don't always come up to the ideal standard. And a lot of what we have to do is encouraging others also. Yeah. Oh,
okay.
I run out of things to say. That doesn't happen to me much. So many things to say. Well, we don't see each other much, but we're all eternally, we're eternal brothers at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, and
yes,
we're very different persons, you and I, in many ways, and
that's part of the wonder of it all.
Yeah,
each of us is different.
Yeah.
But and I really appreciate to have spent some time together. Thank you for prompting me, and
and it's a wonderful journey that Prabhupada's given us all, and we're all very different, and we're all attached to Srila Prabhupada, and by his grace, we at least the beginnings of attachment to Krishna are there.
Yeah.
So thank you for
thank
you for your life, and thank you for all
thank you. Thank you for your
one in those days. And like I say, those formative years, there's some devotees, Janananda Maharaj, who I'm still regularly in touch with. Vichi, such a great soul. Rohini Nandan, Partha. I'm just remembering some of the names. They really made an impact on me.
Yeah, I'm very close with both Partha and Rohini. I'm seeing Rohini tomorrow, actually. Yeah.
Oh, really? Please convey my regards to him. I'm such a rascal.
Yeah, well, I'm a rascal too, for sure.
He brought so many people with his, such a nice person, huh? Rohini Nandan Prabhu.
Yeah.
So nice, and brought so many people to Krishna consciousness. And that was devastating for him, the goings on in the 1980s.
Yes, he was not well treated.
I remember his wife, Radha Priya. I remember the day I left England to go to India, to go forever. That was the idea, that I wasn't going to come back. And I more or less, I didn't. And I remember walking out from Berry Place Temple, and I just looked back, and she was looking out of the window at me with a look of motherly concern.
Oh.
Just this young boy going off to India. I remember that. So nice. So nice.
Well, she also lives nearby. They're not together anymore. The two of them weathered so many trials in this world. But they're both dear souls, dear friends, both.
Yes. Please convey to them my gratefulness, and for of course I didn't know his wife very much, but like I say, she was a loving presence there. And and forgive all my offenses, which I must be doing even now. And Haribol. Glory. And we should. You are the Lenten visitor there. Why don't we get together at least once a year, as long as we're in this miserable material world? And
yeah, definitely.
Why
It would be
not?
wonderful to do.
If I make it out to England again, which I hope to do, maybe we could get together physically also. Just chant together. That's really all we have to do, isn't it? We're doing that.
Yeah,
now,
we could do that.
But
Yeah.
we can chant the holy names together.
Absolutely, yes. Have you ever been to Glastonbury?
I have at least once. I went to a Rath Yatra there years and years ago.
Oh, okay. That's a surprise.
In the early 1980s. I remember, I don't remember much about it except that Chitraketu was there. I believe he's taken sannyas. And there was a photo of Narayan Maharaj on the Rath cart along with Prabhupada, which was pretty not politically correct according to ISKCON political correctness, and still isn't.
Yeah.
I remember that. And I don't remember much else. It was a small Rath cart, and it was one of those small, sweet Rath Yatras.
Well, there was Rath Yatra just 10 days ago.
10 days ago. Oh, there's no lockdown. Wow.
It was it was the only Rath Yatra in the country, and it's because the sort of local network of devotees, they don't believe in all that stuff.
Oh, they don't believe coronavirus exists.
I don't know if that, but they think it's a plot that has to be resisted.
Oh,
so they refuse. They refuse to follow any of the rules. I'm not one of those, but
they got away with it. The police didn't stop them.
The police weren't there.
They weren't there. They were all afraid of coronavirus, I guess. Well, some people say it doesn't exist, but I know people. One of my disciples, who was 41 years old, died from it a few days ago.
Oh
so
my gosh!
It doesn't exist, and it's all a big plot. But
yes, I know. But isn't it interesting that quite a number of devotees in America, as well as, especially in America, I think, have got these ideas about plots and conspiracies and all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going on, but what are you going to do about it? Even if it is there, what are you going to do about it? Chant Hare Krishna. If there's some, I gave a sarcastic class about this actually not long ago, that all these conspiracy theories are wrong. What's actually going on is that there's a race of luminous, intelligent frogs on a nearby asteroid who are planning to invade. So they're just completely mad, you know. But some people say, what is it? That there are lizards have invaded, and anyway, it might be true. You can't disprove it, but one thing's for sure: we got to chant Hare Krishna. And if the lizards come, well, we'll ask them to chant Hare Krishna too.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there are all kinds of things going on behind the scenes, and who knows what's going on. And what are you going to do about it? It's been going on. Politics has been going on since time immemorial. If there are some big demons who are trying to give them some prasadam and ask them to chant Hare Krishna. What else can we do?
Well, or else, if you are so motivated, go and start some resistance movement. Don't just talk about it. Do something. Well, that's what I say.
Rath Yatra, right? They did something.
Yeah, sort of.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement is a non-cooperation movement. We don't want to cooperate with Maya.
Yeah. It's true. You can't argue with that.
But as far as civil authorities are concerned, if they allow us to chant Hare Krishna, then well, why do we have to make any political? Anyway, that's another topic. I'm also not a great fan of all these conspiracy theories. Hare Krishna, Ranchor Prabhu. Yeah, say it.
Hare Krishna.
Say it. That's it.
Say what?
You're going to say something if?
No, I was just Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, that's it. That's all we have. At the end of life?
That's all we have.
That's all, yeah. Prabhupada,
Oh, yeah.
Krishna, Haribol, and the devotees like myself. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So nice to be with you. Hare Krishna.
Haribol.
Haribol, Haribol, Haribol.
Haribol. Haribol.